Hello, YouTube, and welcome to this week's Flyday, Episode 4, A New Hope for EAS. EAS stands for Essential Air Services. It's a subsidy program provided by the federal government through the United States Department of Transportation to subsidize otherwise unprofitable air routes to primarily rural locations. There's about 300 airways, or I should say air routes that are subsidized through this program throughout the United States and surrounding territories. About 160 of them are actually up in Alaska. And we'll be talking a little bit more in depth about the EAS program once we get airborne here. But today's flight is actually going to be on one of those routes. Remember, the lore of our airline here is we started out as an air taxi service after lobbying the state of Missouri to basically sell off and get rid of its fleet of general aviation aircraft, the argument being it was too expensive for the state to maintain and that private industry could do it cheaper, faster, better, what have you. And primarily up until this point, we've been using Beechcraft Bonanzas, Mooney Bravo, I think in one of the flights, the extra S300 for aerobatic performances. But we've started to decide to standardize around some aircraft here, and one of the things about the EAS program is under the Bush administration, it saw a significant drawback in funding from about $300 million a year to $170 million a year. It's increased a little bit under the Obama administration. I think it's today around $220 million a year. But we saw a gutting of some of the routes here in Missouri. Example being the Columbia Regional to St. Louis Airport route was cut under the Bush administration, and the Bush administration's feeling was that state governments and local municipalities should be the ones providing the subsidies for these air routes more than the federal government if they would wish to see them to continue. And through some of our lobbying efforts, I should say, the issue has come up, and we've decided to explore, hey, let's see about offering essential air services through local governments, because right now, the two major players for essential air services in Missouri, the major player is a company called Cape Air based out of Massachusetts, and, state bravado and all of that. Hey, you're already paying us a 50x subsidy on profits. What if we could provide this service better, faster than Cape Air and give them some real competition? Not really competition because we're in line for the subsidy because we're a Missouri-based company and they aren't because they're based in Massachusetts. Now, the 50x subsidy comes from FsPassengers and the fact that they pay a 50x bonus on all profits. So it's a little bit of a game of mechanics, but that's where we are. So let's talk a little bit about the aircraft going to be flying today. Today we're flying the Piper Saratoga, which is going to become the backbone of our air taxi and potentially essential air services fleet. It is been in continual production for many, many years. This is a 2000s paint scheme on it. The aircraft is from Coronado, Coronado.com. You can either buy it through Steam's DLC mechanism for FSX Steam Edition, or you can go to Coronado.com. This is not a high-def aircraft. I've done a further review of it, so I'm just kind of glancing over some of the basics. It's an intermediate cockpit, meaning it is a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more advanced than your default FSX cockpits and aircraft. At the same time, it is not a study aircraft. That would be something like A-to-A simulation, Cessna 182 or Piper Cherokee, or PMDG for commercial airliner, basically professional pilots or student pilots who are trying to become professional pilots. That would be the direction that I would go if you're a student or looking to become a professional pilot and want to study up on those aircraft. Those are what you're wanting to look at. If you're wanting to play Microsoft Flight Simulator and have a little bit more in-depth experience than what the basic aircraft offer you, this is an excellent choice. And it's also an excellent choice to start with in FsPassengers because it's 3,600 pounds, meaning you can fly it in career mode at sea level 0. It carries, again, 5 passengers, usually around 4 depending on your airline's rating and how many passengers you can get at any given time, but it bills them at business class. It's business class fares, so you're going to earn a little bit more income than you would from a Mooney Bravo or a Cessna that charges economy prices. So there's a lot of things that I'd like about this aircraft. If you're looking for another good starter aircraft that's payware out there, take a look at the Cessna 207 Skylane. I think there's one from Albio as well as Coronado that are options for that aircraft. It holds a couple more passengers, but I believe it's an economy class. So a couple more passengers, slightly less per ticket. Kind of take your pick. This is a normal flight. We're going to be flying from Kilo, Sierra, Tango, Lima, otherwise known as Lambert St. Louis International Airport. 2 Kilo Charlie Golf India, KCGI, for those of you who don't speak phonetic alphabet, or Cape Girardeau Regional Airport. Now, this is an actual route, and you'll notice here that there's a 737 here, and we're going to see another aircraft here in a minute, as we get a glorious example of FSX's default horrible AI air traffic control system. But that is a Southwest Airlines 737 there. That comes from worldofai.com. They have basically AI and livery and graphics and everything for just about every airline in the world, including a lot of defunct airlines. So if you want to, say, simulate flying in the heyday in the 70s and 80s for Pan Am, TWA, things like that, you can go download livery and their old air routes and things like that, and relive those glory days of aviation, as you will, of commercial airline travel, things of that nature. So, give you an idea. It's all 100% freeware. However, you have to download each individual airline and install it individually, so it's a little bit time consuming. They do that because not all of them are created by the same people, and then you get into redistribution right issues and stuff like that. So they just say, hey, here it is, this is where you can go to download it and do so. Also works for the older FS9, and I'm just going to go around this American Eagle or American Connections. I think that's an Embraer 145, because I'm going to have to. Again, great ground control AI here. Not. So we're going to go ahead and line up for taxi, get permission to take off, make sure that my flaps are down. I do notice one thing about FsPassengers that is a negative. Make absolutely freaking sure that your flaps are down in takeoff position before you start taxiing. Because what I have found that even if I hit the button just to double check after I've requested clearance for takeoff and have gotten it, it dings me 300 points for not having your flaps properly set for takeoff. So make sure before you even request taxi that they are down and set. Otherwise you're losing 300 points off the bat. And unless you're doing a 2-hour flight, it is very difficult then to break even point-wise in FsPassengers with this aircraft. I've not noticed this problem with any other aircraft. I've flown a couple other Coronados that I have cockpits now, and it doesn't seem to have quite that problem. But this cockpit in particular does have an issue with that. So we're going to head down the runway. And by the way, I'll put a link to worldofai.com in the description below. Now we are flying out of Kilo Tango Sierra. Oh no, wait. I'll get it right here. Kilo Sierra Tango Lima. As a truck goes right in front of us. Great AI ground management. Wonderful AI ground. Yeah, don't get me started. Anyway, Kilo Sierra Tango Lima, otherwise known as KSTL for those of you who don't speak phonetic alphabet, or Lambert St. Louis International Airport. We are simulating an EAS flight today from St. Louis to Cape Girardeau. We're going to explore trying to take over that route from Cape Air, which is a foreign company from Massachusetts, as opposed to an in-state company that we're trying to subsidize and get basically aviation going again in St. Louis and in Missouri through generous state subsidies. And we're going to be flying today to Kilo Charlie Golf India, or KCGI, which is better known as Cape Girardeau Regional Airport, in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, which is, I don't know, 70, 80, I guess about 80, 90 miles south of St. Louis, off I-55. Take I-55 south. Kind of familiar a lot with the area. Cape Girardeau, famous person from there is Rush Limbaugh, the radio personality, talk show guy. He's from Cape. Don't know too many other people that are from Cape. In fact, this air route is currently serviced by Cape Air out of Massachusetts, as I did forget to turn on the weather. Or I should say, I had FSXWX installed, but I don't think I had it working at this point. I don't think I had one of the components correctly installed. Anyway, it didn't load any weather, so I went ahead and loaded the default real-time weather there at this point. So let's talk a little bit more about the Essential Air Services credit. So, to qualify for EAS programs, you have to be in a regional airport that's essentially 70 miles from a medium-sized hub or larger. Think St. Louis International or Lambert St. Louis or Kansas City International Airport. Additionally, like to give you an example, here in Missouri, we have 4 routes that qualify from airports from Missouri. Kirksville Regional to St. Louis, Cape Girardeau to St. Louis, which is actually the flight that we're flying here today, Joplin to Dallas, Fort Worth, and Fort Wood, Waynesville area to St. Louis as well. I'll throw in there Quincy, Hannibal, Missouri. It's actually technically Quincy, Illinois to St. Louis, which is over on the Illinois side of the river, but Quincy's on one side of the river, Hannibal's on the other. And you just take the bridge across to Quincy. Other flights that are EAS services programs into St. Louis include, I believe, Quincy, Illinois, Fort Dodge, Iowa, Jonesboro, Arkansas, Marion County. I don't know if Marion's still there or not, or if that program's still in the case. But at any rate, the bulk of these flights are operated by Cape Air, which is based out of Massachusetts, somewhere in Massachusetts. And they're one of the largest EAS airlines in the country. They basically gain about $30 million a year in revenue from the program. And at a $200 million program, that's a substantial chunk of the money. And they fly a lot of the EAS routes. Primarily, they fly Cessna 210s, which are twin-engine, 8-passenger aircraft. And then here recently, there's been a newer player in the area called Air Choice 1, which is based out of here in St. Louis, out of, well, greater St. Louis area, technically Concord, Missouri. It acts as a regional airline. It offers commuter flights from Lambert and O'Hare to smaller regional airports. They fly like Jonesboro, Arkansas to St. Louis, Fort Dodge, Iowa. Very shortly, they're going to be adding a flight to Jackson, Tennessee. And they fly primarily Cessna 208 Grand Caravans, which was interesting because I first became aware of them because I would notice that, hey, every Sunday night be at the in-laws' house, fire up FlightAware or Flight Radar 24, whichever one it is, and notice that there was a 208 always flying from Decatur to St. Louis. And I always just thought that was kind of interesting. Go on, I noticed there's a lot of Cessna 208s flying around the country, and it turns out that a lot of the FedEx feeder airlines for FedEx fly the Cessna, the cargo variant of the 208. And, well, Air Choice 1, based out of here in St. Louis, is flying 8 of those aircraft, and it comprises their entire fleet, and they may be adding additional flights. So that's kind of an interesting note. You know, there is competition here. So the largest provider of EAS service in the country is a airline called Great Lakes Airlines. They're actually based out of Wyoming, Cheyenne, Wyoming. And they operate the B-1900D primarily. And that is, I think they are the largest operator of B-1900s, at least in the U.S., if not worldwide, commercially. And that's going to be the aircraft we're going to be moving to in the turboprop stage. So stay tuned for that. Additionally, these next few videos are going to be exploring these EAS routes to Missouri, and I think it's going to be expanded a little bit beyond Missouri to include basically the routes that go into St. Louis. I'm not sure if I'm going to do the Fort Dodge, Iowa route, but I'm certainly going to do Kirksville, Fort Leonard Wood, Waynesville, which that's going to be a phenomenal video. I can't wait because I have interesting history, and that's just an interesting flight flying in and out of that airport. Both in, well, not necessarily in the simulated world, but certainly in the real world. And we'll talk about the reasons why in that video. I don't want to give away too many spoilers. Also, we're going to be looking at the Jonesboro, Arkansas to St. Louis, to Lambert, St. Louis route. And that's one that I'm going to want to do personally because, well, just I'm very, very familiar with that part of the state. Going down there, my grandparents live just south of Poplar Bluff, north of Corning, in Missouri still, but Corning, Arkansas. And I'm very familiar with that area, growing up hearing stories from all my relatives that all lived around that area. Both sets of my grandparents are from that area. In fact, growing up, they lived on the same road, about 4 miles apart from each other, so you'd be going down 67, come to the country road, and I think it's 271, go right 3 miles, and you were to Grandma Ficker's, you turn left and go about 2 miles, you're at the Ramsey's place, so Grandma Ramsey's. So that was always one of those interesting things kind of growing up. Both grandparents lived relatively close to each other growing up, so I guess it was convenient for my parents. There was no question of whose house were we staying at during the holidays and stuff like that, because you could go down and visit with both, be with one in the afternoon and another one in the evening. No problems for Thanksgiving and Christmases and stuff like that. But at any rate, that's going to be probably the end of the EAS phase, and then we're going to be moving on to regional airlines. And when we get there, I don't know. The options kind of become the Embraer E-Jet series, and there is a payware cockpit out there that's pretty decent for about $35, $40, $45, somewhere in that. I don't know. The prices I saw were like in euros, so I have to convert in my head. Don't know exactly. And then really there's nothing left in the turboprop market but the Dash 8. And I'm not sure if there's any really good freeware Dash 8s out there. There is a payware version out there, but it's very pricey, and it's a study aircraft. It's to train real pilots how to fly the Dash 8 and get familiar with the cockpit in particular, for cockpit familiarization. And did I mention it was expensive? Like, hellaciously expensive? Over $100 expensive? And that $30-$40, I don't mind spending that for a cockpit, even upwards of $50. Hey, that's part of my normal. I usually budget $60 to $80 a month to spend on video games of some sort for entertainment. So that's well within my budget for like an ERJ or some of the other options out there from Coronado. I don't think we're going to go the business route. I don't know. There's just something not really appealing. I don't find flying Learjets or Hawker 800s or Cessna Citations. I just don't find anything really appealing about those aircraft. I don't know what it is. I just really never have. They're just kind of, eh. So really enough here, other than to say that next flight we will start into multi-engine props with the Piper Seneca 2, also from Coronado Aircraft. After that, it'll be it'll be the B1900 turboprop, and then we're going to be moving into regional aircraft and regional airlines and regional flights. Basically what happens is you go from being able to, in an hour, fly from Jeff City to St. Louis in a general aviation aircraft, to in an hour being able to fly from like St. Louis to one of the EAS destinations, let's say Fort Wood, Waynesville Regional Airport, in about the same amount of time in a B1900, or actually even with the Seneca 2. So you get more distance, generally speaking, more passengers, so therefore more revenue in the same amount of time. And then once you get to a regional aircraft, then you can start talking about flying from St. Louis to, say, Nashville or St. Paul or Chicago in about an hour's worth of flight time. So that 1 hour of flight time, you're carrying more passengers. You go from carrying 5 or 6 to carrying 19 to carrying 30 to 50 to 70, and so on and so forth. And that's when you start really making money in this game, is once you get to the regional aircraft level, whether it's flying a regional jet like the Embraer 135, 145 series, a turboprop such as a Dash 8 or an Embraer EMB 120. Actually, I think you can fly that at the same level as the B1900. Or going on to a larger regional aircraft like a Dash 8, and maybe even getting into the CRJ 900s or the ERJ 170, 175 series. Those are about 100 passenger, or the MD-80 if you want to kind of go old school, small, medium haul routes with a 100 passenger market. MD-80, MD-90, Boeing 717. In fact, eventually we're going to get there, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get there. But let's get back to the flight. So let's talk a little bit about Cape Girardeau, Missouri. It is the home of Southeast Missouri State University, which is part of the University of Missouri school system. My father went there for a semester, couldn't get the classes he needed the second semester, and promptly transferred to Arkansas State in Jonesboro. We'll talk more about that when we actually do the flight to Jonesboro. So that's family and immediate kind of history of the area. The most famous son is probably the conservative talk show host Rush Limbaugh, is from Cape Girardeau. Peter Kinder, the current lieutenant governor of Missouri, is from Cape Girardeau. But outside of that, Linda Godwin, who's an astronaut, was also from Cape. But really, there's not a whole lot of famous individuals. The book Kill Shot takes place in Cape Girardeau, and several of the scenes for the 2009 movie were shot there. Its probably most famous area recently outside of Rush Limbaugh was used for the setting of North Carthage, Missouri for the 2013 film Gone Girl with Ben Affleck. Which, if you've ever read the book or seen the movie, it's just really, one of those films. Not a first date film. I haven't seen the movie, haven't read the book. I just know the basic storyline from honest trailers on YouTube. That's about as much as I cared to explore it. But a lot of that film was shot there in Cape Girardeau. Currently, we are actually flying over southern part of Illinois. If you're going to take a straight shot from St. Louis down to Cape, the two states kind of exchange borders based on the path of the Mississippi River. So we are over on the east side of the Mississippi River, flying through Illinois, and then eventually the river curves back to the left, or right, I guess, depending on which side you're going. But if you're flying south, to the left, and we enter Missouri once again. Cape kind of sits right there on the Mississippi River. A few other things about Cape Girardeau. It's kind of noted as being the place between the Poplar Bluff Hospital and Barnes in St. Louis that they send patients to if they need cancer treatment or more sophisticated treatments down in that part of the country. If something's really wrong with you, they send you up to Barnes in St. Louis or St. Louis University Hospital, but usually Barnes. At least that's where all my relatives would end up at some point later on in their life, would be Barnes, which is a huge hospital complex and a pretty good, darn good hospital, especially for here in the Midwest. If living in the St. Louis area, if you want to, you almost want to make sure that your health care plan covers Barnes, because they cooperate with WashU. It's a teaching hospital, and they have access to some more sophisticated treatments and experimental treatments that may not be available at other places, even around town. But it's kind of noted for being the place in between there if you have heart problems or cancer treatments, things of that are maybe a little bit more in depth than, say, setting broken bones or dealing with a heart attack or the immediate aftermath of a stroke or something like that. They'll stabilize you on and send you to Cape. So we're now leaving St. Louis and joining the Kansas City Center for air traffic control. Which this is still all part of the Kansas City control region tower. I'm not sure, I don't think we make it down to Memphis Center on this flight. I believe that Cape is still Kansas City Center airspace. No, I don't have track IR here. I'm just kind of looking around the cockpit. One of my favorite features about this aircraft, though, is it does have that digital fuel gauge on it that will tell you, you can flip between different modes, and it will tell you how many gallons of fuel you have left, as well as your fuel consumption per hour, gallons per hour that you're using, gallons to destination, amount of time remaining airborne at that particular moment. All of that is handy information because in FsPassengers you want to land with at least 45-minute fuel reserve. If not, you get dinged, and you get dinged good. In terms of negative points, I believe it's a negative 400 points for not flying with enough reserve fuel. Now I'm canceling IFR here because I believe it has something to do with the runway that IFR is going to select for me versus uh, what runway and the direction that I really want to try to land at this airport in order to make sure that we get there on time. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel the IFR here and go to a VFR flight, for lack of a better term, especially since I think you have to land on a visual approach to this runway anyway, especially with this aircraft, because I think that's it. I think it's going to want to line me up for an ILS approach, and this aircraft doesn't have ILS on it, so it's just easier to select a different runway and come in with a visual approach. So I'm going to go ahead and time accelerate this next portion here at 4x time. Again, it might be a little bit annoying, but we're basically starting to search for our airport in the list of nearest airports and going to select our approach vector and things like that. Again, I believe that the AI and the air traffic control is going to want me set me up into a direction that I really don't want to go in, else I'm going to lose time and therefore points for arriving a little bit too late on the FsPassengers side. So I canceled my IFR flight, went visual, because I'm going to have to do a visual landing with this aircraft anyway, because it doesn't have the approach hold for ILS approach. So we're back to normal speed here. I've turned on track IR. I know this annoys some people, but when flying a visual approach or taxiing on takeoff, I find track IR to be invaluable. I'll try to keep my head movements to a minimum here, but no guarantees, as I need to go back and forth between GPS, other navigational equipment, and looking for the runway, things of that nature. This is going to be a visual approach. Remember, I canceled my IFR flight plan because I knew that the runway was going to line me up for is one that I don't particularly like to land on. In particular, they're going to set me off for an ILS approach in an aircraft that's not ILS capable. So it doesn't have the approach hold function, and it's a nice enough day. Not very many clouds in the sky. Might as well take advantage of it and do a visual landing. Alright, so I know where the airport is. Unfortunately, we're going to be coming up here set up in the wrong direction, so I'm going to have to do a little bit of a course correction. And I probably fly interesting approach courses to most people. This comes from too many years of flying onto aircraft carriers and jeep carriers and other aircraft, and simulated aircraft, and in particular the F4U Corsair. The Corsair has a very unique landing approach onto a carrier. I had a cousin who, I should say, my mom's cousin who flew Wildcats and later F4U Corsairs in the Navy during World War II, and he flew them off of jeep carriers or escort carriers, and he only told a couple of stories. He didn't talk about his time in World War II. In fact, none of my relatives who fought in the Pacific Theater ever talked much about their time in the service. I think the one exception, as I realize I'm heading into the wrong runway here. Well, correct runway, wrong direction. So I'm going to kind of pull up here and do a tight turn, which this is something you can get away with in a general aviation aircraft that you necessarily can't get away with as I'm going to hold altitude at 1,000 feet in a larger aircraft. And at this point, you would go missed and realign your approach. So in none of these videos, I really fly what I would consider to be a proper or a textbook approach course or anything like that. Eventually, we get to the point where that does happen as we get into larger flights. I don't know, in simulators, I just tend to fly a much more aggressive approach course than I think you normally would. Again, used to flying onto aircraft carriers in simulations and in dogfighting games, things of that nature. So I tend to use an aircraft carrier approach to land-based navigation here. But at any rate, or landing on air bases. At any rate, he never talked about his time much flying in World War II, and I never really dug into it, wasn't around him a whole lot. And it wasn't until his funeral and a burial that realized that he had, or knew that he was part of Taffy 3 Task Force in the Battle of I think it was Lady Gulf. If you want some interesting history there, go look up the battle, in particular, of that task force. And there's another good book called something of the Tin Can Sailors. I can't remember if it's Battle of the Tin Can Sailors or what the exact title of the book, but it's about Taffy 3 and that task force. As they were cut off from Bull Halsey's main fleet as he sailed his fleet once again into a hurricane. I think he's the only admiral who's ever who's ever taken his fleet and sailed his fleet into a hurricane or a typhoon, not once, but twice, and still kept his command. Granted, different era, World War II, all of those things. Yeah, we're going to come in for remember, kids, don't try this approach at home. Because we're what you call experts. Not really. The number of hours I have flying a Piper Saratoga in the real world is 0. Most of my flight time was either logged in 152s, 162s, primarily 162s, or 172s, Cessnas, with about 5 hours in a Piper Cherokee, 4 or 5. I do like Piper aircraft, though. I just like the looks of them. There's something about that. Same thing with Beechcraft. A lot of Beechcraft aircraft I also like. I just find them to be aesthetically pleasing.
That was a rough landing.
That in the Beechcraft Bonanza is just fun to say. It's fun to say Bonanza. Fortunately, this aircraft does not take a whole lot of room to try to keep the wings level, get them level. Doesn't take a whole lot of runway to land this aircraft. Not my best landing ever. Light off. The taxiway. But hey, we made it. It was a harder landing than normal, but no damage resulted in the aircraft, so hey, any landing you take away from or you walk away from is a win. Look, the ground-based radar system. So this is a tower-based airport, manned, I believe, from like 7 a.m. until 10 or 11 p.m. every day. Several general aviation aircraft here, but it also has a small terminal area, primarily for Cape Air to provide essential air service to St. Louis, as well as other chartered flights. But yeah, that was pretty much our flight for this Friday. Thank you very much for watching, and next time, as I'm just going to ignore a bunch of taxi procedures here, I promise you eventually we will get a little bit more in tune with actual airline and proper taxi procedures, but I'm trying to race against the clock here and get landed so I can get the bonus for arriving on time in FsPassengers. So thank you very much for watching. See you next time.